Sukkah, we're going to discuss two ideas that are fundamental to Sukkot. One's fundamental to many other things, and we'll see why. The other one is an interesting topic to discuss, and we'll view several different ways of answering the question, and then see how it affects us and our Chag. So let's begin. Hilchot Sukkah starts in Siman Tafresh Chaf. The first question mentioned or answered, so to speak, by the Torah is like this: Hata'am, the reason, lama talah hakatuv mitzvat sukkah v'harbe mitzvot b'yetziat Mitzrayim. Why do we have many mitzvot that are dependent on mitzvat yetziat Mitzrayim? Why are they, so to speak, attached to it? Okay, many times you'll find in Tefillah, especially on Shabbos, you'll find zecher yetziat Mitzrayim and so on and so forth. Okay, you do it in Kiddush. And many times of the year, a lot of things are Zecher Mitzrayim. What was so special that needs to be attached to Zecher Mitzrayim? So we need to attach also Hilchot Sukkah to that as well. So the source that's brought down in the Torah and its attachment is like this. In the Pasuk in Vayikra, it says, Basukot teshvu shivat yamim, kol ezrach v'Yisrael yishvu basukot. So everyone's going to sit there for 7 days. Leman yid'u dorotechem, so that for generations you will know, ki b'Sukkot hoshavti et bnei Israel, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I sat bnei Israel in Sukkot, b'hotzi'i otam meretz Mitzrayim, when I took them out of Egypt, ani Hashem Elokechem. So everyone needs to know for generations that God took them out of Egypt with Sukkot. So why does it need to be Zecher Mitzrayim? What's so important? Why you touch? You say, okay, fine. You know, when we went to the Midbar, we were in Sukkot. Why is this the whole Yetziah of Mitzrayim dependent on this? Says the Torah like this, and this is like a golden rule we need to follow in life. And every time it comes up, okay, for the next year, anytime it comes up, Zecher Mitzrayim, you'll be like, assess if what you're doing at that time when you're saying Zecher Mitzrayim applies to this rule and how it applies. Says the Torah like this: Tala Katuv, the Pasuk depended this mitzvat sukkah b'yetziat Mitzrayim. He attached one to the other. V'chen harbe mitzvot, and so do many mitzvot are like this. Lefi shehu davar, because this is something shera'inu be'enenu or be'oznenu shamanu. We saw this with our eyes and we heard this with our ears. Ve'en adam yachol lahakchisheno, and no one else can disprove this. Vehi hamoreh al mitut metziut haboreit aleh. This comes to prove the truth of God's existence. Shehu bara hakol lirtzono, that He created everything to His will. V'hu asher lo hakoach b'memshala, He has the power and the leadership, the ruling. V'hayacholet ba'ilyonim u'b'tachtonim, and the power and the ability over the higher realms and lower realms. La'asot b'hem kirtzono, to do as He pleases. Ve'en mi she'omar lo ma taseh, and no one can tell Him what to do. Kasher asa imanu, as He did for us, b'hotzio otanu meretz Mitzrayim, when He took us out of Egypt, be'otot u'v'moftim, with wonders. So any time that we are celebrating some form of miracle or some form of story in our history, whenever we have an issue of Zecher Mitzrayim, this is another topic that, just like Yetziat Mitzrayim, we saw with our eyes and we heard with our ears, and it's a form of God's approval, so to speak, of His existence. So to each time is another way of us proving of God's power and existence, and no one else can disprove it in that manner. Okay, we all went through Ananei Kavod. We all lived in Sukkot. Okay, there were 6 million Jews in the desert eating man and living in Sukkot and floating with the clouds. So it can't be disproved of God's existence in the same way that Yetziat Mitzrayim cannot be disproved. Okay, that's the golden rule number 1 today. Okay, no, you're gonna have to take the mute off, because otherwise I won't be able to hear an approval. Yeah, okay. Fine. Tam lama mitzvat sukkah b'chodesh hashvi'i v'lo b'Nisan. We have a phenomenal question. If it's so attached to Yetziat Mitzrayim, then technically after we do the house cleaning and we check for chometz, then we should be doing Seder night in the sukkah, and the next morning we should be shaking lulav. Why are we not doing this in Nisan? Why are we only doing all these mitzvot in Tishrei? If it's Yetziat Mitzrayim, what's in Nisan? So that's when we should be celebrating our Sukkot as well. Same thing. They should be attached. Okay? Says the Gemara, which is going to be the pivotal argument about what we're going to discuss, what we're now discussing to answer this question. The two shittot. What is it based on? Why is Sukkah, what are we doing it for? What's the reason behind it? The Tanya, we learned in the Gemara in Sukkah, Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph. Quoting the pasuk we learned, Ki Sukkot Hashatit Ben Israel. There's an argument, what is this Sukkot? Anane Kavod Hayu de Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer holds these were the clouds of glory. Rabbi Akiva Omer, but he holds no. Sukkot mamash asu lahem. They actually sat in Sukkot. They had 4 walls, and they were made of wood, and they had schach on top. It's got nothing to do with Anane Kavod. Okay, those are the two arguing opinions. What is the Sukkot? Okay. Says Ibn Ezra, he wants to answer that we need them in order to protect us from the cold. Says the Ibn Ezra on the pasuk, "Ve'im yish'al sho'el lama b'tishrei zot hamitzvah." If someone's going to come and ask you why are we doing this mitzvah in Tishrei, yesh lashiv, then you can answer him, "Ki anan Hashem haya ala machane yomam," because when they were in the desert, there was a cloud of glory over them during the day. V'hashemesh lo yakam, and the sun did not hit them. Or miyamot Tishrei hechelu la'asot sukkot ba'avur hakor, and during the month of Tishrei, they made sukkot because of the cold. What's bothering you with this pirush of the Ibn Ezra? It's not bothering anyone because no one's saying anything.
So if they had an nekavod, why would they need a sukkah, right? And an nekavod should protect them from everything.
Brilliant, fantastic, Gilad. Now I'm gonna go even further with that. Okay, they had Anane Kavod at the beginning when they left Mitzrayim. Okay, they lost the Anane Kavod because of the Egel, and then they were in the baking heat. Then by Yom Kippur they got a kapara and they got the Anane Kavod back, and then they were asked to build Sukkot inside the Anane Kavod. So in essence, Ibn Ezra doesn't make any sense. Now, I can't say that because he's a Rishon and I don't understand him. So we'll leave it as I don't understand him, but we have a very big question about how to understand this Ibn Ezra. Why, how has he answered that because we have Anane Kavod and Shemet and then we had to build Sukkot? What's one got to do with the other? Okay. It's a shvag I have an Ezra. I don't have a teretz for the Ibn Ezra, but I have other teretzim. So we're going to go further. We're going to go with a Tur. The Tur, who's this next part of Siman Tafresh Chafes, is like this. V'asukot she'omer katuv, the Sukkot that the Pasuk is discussing, shivanu bahem, that we sat in these Sukkot, hem anane kvodo, these are the clouds of glory of Hashem, she'ekifan bahem leba yakeh bahem sharav hashemesh, that God used to surround us, to encompass us, so that we shouldn't be hurt, not by the heat and not by the sun. V'dugma lezeh, and similar to, and an example for this, tzivanu la'asot sukkot, God commanded us to make sukkot, kedei sheniskor niflotav v'norotav, that we should remember these anane kavod that surrounded and encompassed us in the midbar. V'af al pi sheyatzanu mitzrayim b'chodesh Nisan, even though we left Egypt in the month of Nisan, lo tzivanu la'asot sukkah bo'oto hazman, we weren't commanded to build a sukkah during the month of Nisan, lefi shehu yamot hakayitz, because the Nisan is the beginning of the months of the summer. V'derech kol adam la'asot sukkah, and it would be completely normal for somebody to build a sukkah in Nisan. Letzel, to be in shade. V'lo hayta nikeret asiyatenu, and if we would build it in the Nisan, then it wouldn't be recognized the fact that we build a sukkah. Shehem b'mitzvat haboreh yitbarach, because it would be that we would be fulfilling a mitzvah, because everyone thinks, okay, fine, he's going to chill out in the sun. He wants to be shaded, so he's going to chill out in his sukkah. Lachen ציווה אותנו שנעשה בחודש השביעי. He's going to do it in the month of the 7th month. שהוא זמן הגשמים, because that's the beginning of the rain. ודרך כל אדם לצאת מסוכתו. And everybody's going to leave the sukkah ולשב בביתו, especially with the London weather that's freezing cold. Everyone's going to go leave the sukkah and start sitting in the house. ואנחנו יוצאים מן הבית לשב בסוכה, but we're leaving our house and we're having a shir in the sukkah. בזה יראה לכל שמצוות המלך היא עלינו לעשותו. Everyone's going to recognize that we're doing this for the mitzvah, okay? Because it's the beginning of the winter. And it's not normal to make a sukkah at the beginning of winter when it's freezing cold outside. That tour makes more sense, correct?
Yes.
Yes, okay. But we have a problem with this tour because it's contradictory to what the Ibn Ezra said. The Ibn Ezra said it's going to protect you from the cold. And the Torah says that we build a sukkah letzel to protect you from the sun. So what's happening? Can the Torah argue on the Ibn Ezra?
Well, it depends what's the starting point, right?
Why?
Because if you have nothing, so obviously sukkah will protect you from the cold. If you have a house, so it's going against nature.
Yeah, but they didn't have houses in the deserts.
Which means that the tool is I think it makes less sense than Ibn Ezra in that sense, right? If you talk about the physical aspect, right, of protecting from the cold or actually going, so if they didn't have houses, so the tool doesn't make sense.
Again, you're saying that if they didn't have houses, then it makes more sense to build a sukkah to protect you from the cold?
Yeah.
So I disagree with that, simply because having a sukkah in London didn't really protect me from the cold.
Compared to being outside the street without anything.
Yeah, that's one aspect. You're right. However, if I would have, even a badly built sukkah, it would protect me by giving me shade. It doesn't have to be well built.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be. In Hebrew, it's atum. You know, it doesn't have to be atum to protect me from the heat. So I have a problem. So yes, it would make more sense according to the Ibn Ezra, according to the Torah, when it's protecting you from the sun. That makes more sense. So the question is, can he argue against an Ibn Ezra? Because technically, the Torah is Achron HaRishonim, and Ibn Ezra is definitely one of the early Rishonim. So how can
if we can learn from the halacha of Niyat Sukkah, what is the kosher Sukkah, but which one is right? Because we know that Sukkah doesn't need to be properly sealed, right?
So it doesn't need to. It does not need to be sealed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which means that there is so Torah has a stronger argument, basically.
Yes, exactly. So here we have our dear friend the Kaf HaChaim, which is why I like this Kaf HaChaim so much, because you'll see it all it's like ties everything together quite very, very much nicely. So it says the Kaf HaChaim in Ot Bet over there in Siman Taf Reish Chaf Hei, אבל נוכל לפרש דלכולי עלמא הווה האיתא. That actually this goes according to both opinions. כי היה להם סוכות וגם עננים. They actually sat in Sukkot within the ענני כבוד. Which means, סוכה לכל אחד ואחד, they had a sukkah for each and every family, ועננים לכללות הכל. And they had these עננים for everybody together. ולא פליגי אלא במשמעות הדקרא. The argument between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva is only in the mashma'ut of the posuk, not because it's an argument about which one they actually had. ומשמע מדברי השולחן אורוך שכתב בזה, and according to the way the Shulchan Aruch writes down the halacha, שצריך לכוון בישיבת סוכה כי היא זכר לענני כבוד. That we're more concerned that when we sit in the sukkah, that we should remember that HaKadosh Baruch Hu surrounded us in an ענני כבוד than the fact that we actually built a sukkah. Okay, so in essence, we don't actually care whether it's for the summer or for the winter, because we're not doing it because of the sukkah, and not because it's protecting us from one or the other. We're actually only making the sukkah because of the ananei kavod. But then it makes sense according to the tool, because it wouldn't be recognized when it was the beginning of the summer, because people go out for shade, and it would be recognized because it would be abnormal to go into a unprotected hut if you're still going to be freezing cold inside the hut. Okay. Says the Ramban, a different explanation to why we have to have Sukkot in Tishrei and Pesach in Nisan. This Ramban is also very similar to I can't find who to. There's another shitta. So we're just going to go to the Rambam and we'll find out later who does he fit with. Okay, fine. Says this Ramban, so that at the beginning of summer you do Pesach, and the beginning of winter you do Sukkot. It would seem, at large from this summary that God was only being convenient to us because it would be too hard for us to also clean the house and to do b'dikat chomet and to buy matzahs and then after all those crazy things that we do and we get into massive fights about before Pesach, to also have to start worrying about searching for our Arba Minim and building a sukkah and living outdoors. It would be like too much for us. So let's split it in half and we do a bit here and a bit there. That's what it looks like. But when you look at the Rambam inside, it's not what he means, and you'll see why. Now, the Ramban, as you probably all know, it usually comes to argue, to clarify the truth about Rashi's interpretation of the pasuk. So he usually takes Rashi and then either bashes him or he strengthens him. In this case, is one of the rare occasions where he actually comes to strengthen Rashi. Says the Ramban like this: Ki beSukkot shavti et bnei Israel. During Sukkot, I put bnei Israel in Sukkot. I sat them in these huts. Ananei kavod lashon Rashi. Rashi says we're talking about ananei kavod. Okay, so they all sat in this huge cloud of glory that did their dry cleaning and their washing for them, and everything was clean and purified for them, and so on and so forth. Says the Ramban, v'hu nachon be'enai aderech hapshat. This is the correct interpretation in my eyes according to the pshat. Ki tziva sheyid'u hadorot et kol ma'aseh Hashem hagadol asher aseh imahem. That God is commanding us that we should know for generations these wonderful things, these wonders He did for us. Sheshachan otam bananei kvodo kesuka. That He settled Bnei Israel in these ananei kavod. Ki inyan shnema, as we said in the pasuk in Yeshaya, ubar Hashem al kol machon har Tzion ve'al mekra'eha anan yomam ve'ashan ve'noga esh lehava laila ki al kol kvod chupa. HaKadosh Baruch Hu protected us in His own glory with these clouds of glory, with these fires to protect us during the night. V'sukkah tihiyeh letzel yomam mechorev. And the sukkah will be a shade during the day from the heat. Since we already understood in the pasuk, it's already clearly said to us that we have a cloud during the day and the fire during the night. Amar stam ki b'sukkot hoshavti. It would be completely superfluous to say ki b'sukkot hoshavti. It's being repetitive. Shasiti lahem ananei kavod, kvodi sukkot lahagen alehem. That God gave us His clouds of glory to protect us. He already said ki b'sukkot hoshavti, and that's anyway ananei kavod. So why are you saying it again? So the Rambam explains, v'hine tziva batchila yemot hachama b'zikaron yetziat Mitzrayim b'chodsho b'moado. So he's saying, at the beginning, when He came out of Egypt, God told us to remember Pesach in its right time, during its month. So to speak, we do Pesach during Nisan. V'tziva b'zikaron hanes hakayam, but He commanded us with respect to remembering this ness of the ananei kavod. Hana'aseh lahem kol yemei amidatam b'midbar b'tchilat yemot hakshamim. That He did for us at the beginning, in the midbar, for years and years and years. He told us, remember this at the beginning of Yemot HaKshamim, the beginning of the winter. Va'adad ha'omer Sukkot mamash asu. So one second, that fits in with Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer says ananei kavod, so to speak. God told us to perform the Zikaron of Yetziat Mitzrayim during the right month of Nisan, because that's when we came out of Egypt. Second of all, is that for the 40 years that we had ananei kavod, then we will remember that always at the beginning of the winter. Va'adad ha'omer, according to the second opinion, which is Rabbi Akiva, Sukkot mamash, we're actually talking about actual Sukkot. החלו לעשותן בתחילת החורף, he does the beginning of the winter, מפני הקור כמנהג המחנות. Because he's protecting himself from the cold like the way it would in camps. ולכן ציווה בהן בזמן הזה, that's why he's actually doing it at that time. והזיכרון, and remembering it, why? שידעו ויזכרו שהיו במדבר, because they remember they were in the desert. לא באו בבית, they didn't go inside the house. ועיר מושב, and a settled city. לא מצאו, they didn't find 40 שנה for 40 years. והשם היה עמהם, לא חסרו דבר, and God was with them, and they didn't lack anything. So here, the Ramban is actually going with the Ibn Ezra. So technically, the sukkah would protect you from the cold. But the point is that for 40 years, they didn't find anywhere to settle. They were always moving around for 40 years. They got up, they left. Sometimes they were there for a day, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, some a month. There was one place they were there for 19 years, but they had no idea that they were going to be there for 19 years. They just settled. They were always ready to leave whenever they would have to. So for 40 years when they were in the Midbar and they never found somewhere to settle, we should remember that by going into this sukkah, which is not a settled place, however comfortable we try to make it, and make the walls thick and strong, and protect us from the wind and from the rain, and having these roofs that go up and down. And in Israel, where you have air conditioning within the sukkah, you'll never settle. You're never like fixed there, because it's always movable and shakeable and noisy, and you can't get along with your neighbors who play music too late and too early in the day. But that's how it is. So this Ramban, he's saying it's not because he's being considerate about Pesach cleaning and having it separate to the Bedikat Chametz, but because he's, so to speak, summing up the end of the 40 years, we should remember at the beginning of the Geshamim, where it would be unsettled for somebody to leave his house and go into a sukkah, so too we are expressing the fact that they were unsettled in the Midbar by the fact they didn't have a Beit or Ir Moshav where they could be settled during the 40 years in the Midbar. Okay? Understood. Confirmation, somebody.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay. Very good. Okay. The Rashbam. We've still got time. The Rashbam says, Kivan shehit kufat asif. Since it is the tkufa of collecting, of gathering, v'roya ha'adam et otrotav mele'im kol tuv, and a person will see his stocks full, his cupboards will be packed with all flour and stuff, everything that he needs for the winter. Shema yavo lachshov, maybe the person will come to think, ki kochi ve'otzem yadi asa li et ha'chayil hazeh, that his own strength gave him this produce that he will be able to get through the winter. So this Rashbam is kind of to teach us that we should be very, very careful of the way we approach the winter. Okay. Just before we go into this Rashbam, I want to quote you this Rokeach, which is what I was looking for beforehand. It says the Rokeach, which is connected to the Ramban, which is why I want to show it to you now. Reshit lemea choref, v'kol reshit yesh latet la'Hashem yitbarach. Okay, that the winter, the beginning of the winter is Tishrei, and every reshit we want to give to our Kodesh Baruch Hu. How can I compare this to you? For example, a bechor, somebody who has a firstborn son has to give it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so he has to go do a pidyon haben. He needs to poder the son from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Somebody who's got bikurim, okay, the first produce, he has to give it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Someone who's got a peter, a bechor in his cattle, he has to give it to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The beginning of anything we have to give to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So says the Rokeach, Velama tziva leshev besukkah. Why did the Kodesh Baruch Hu command us to sit in the sukkah? B'chodesh hashvi'i, in the 7th month. Lefi ki tchilat yamot hachama chag hamatzot. The beginning of the summer months, we do the Chag of Pesach. Vesukkot tchilat yamot hachoref, and the beginning of the winter months, we do Sukkot. Ki kol reshit la'Kodesh Baruch Hu. The beginning of each of these two seasons, so to speak, the two parts of the year, we contribute to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, this is another a note, which is quite interesting. In the same way that we siege a city in order to conquer the city, so too the clouds did to us. Just like in Jericho, we sieged the city for 7 days. And they surrounded it each day. They circumferenced the city each day. And on the 7th day, they did 7 cycles. We, so to speak, are going to come and we're going to conquer the Torah. We're going to go and we're going to learn it and we're going to be embedded in it. We're going to be owning it. So every day we do 1 hakafa in Shul in the Hoshanot. And then tomorrow, Hoshana Rabbah, we're going to do 7 hakafot. We're going to completely circumference the Torah all the way around so that the whole year will be so attached to the Torah. But that's another nakuda. The point is, which is next to, which is like the Rambam we learned, is the fact that at the beginning of the winter and the beginning of the summer, we're devoting to our Kodesh Baruch Hu. So we have Pesach at the beginning of the summer and Sukkot at the beginning of the winter. Okay, let's go back to this Rashbam. The Rashbam, with the fact that we have Tukufat HaAsif, the collecting, the gathering of our produce. So we should be careful of Kochi V'Otzim Nadi. Okay, we're gonna attach another pirush to this Rashbam. According to my memory, this is what we should be doing. Okay, so let's look at this Rashbam. Says the Rashbam, quoting the pasuk we learned, Chago Sukkot Haselecha. No, sorry, it's a different pasuk in Devarim. Chago Sukkot Haselecha beospecha mi garnecha u'miyagvecha. You should do Sukkot when you gather in the produce of your grains and your vineyards. Beospecha et tvuat haaretz, when you gather in the produce of the ground. Ubatechem meleim kol tuv, and your houses are full of all the good. Dagan v'tirosh v'itzhar, yeah, your grains and your wines and all your produce. Leman tizkeru, so that you should remember, ki besukot oshavti et bnei Israel, that I sat bnei Israel in the Sukkot. Bamidbar 40 shana, for 40 years they were in these Sukkot. Belo yishuv ubelo nacha, without being settled and without having their own land. Umitoch kach, and when you do this, when you remember, and you go into your Sukkot, titnu hoda'ah, you will be giving thanks, lemi shenatan lachem nachala, to the one who gave you land, an inheritance in land, ubatechem beleim kotuv, and your house is full of good, so that you can be grateful every time you walk into Tesco and you can buy everything that you want. And you will not give, say it in your hearts, that it's my strength and power that gave me this ability. Don't think that because we've got a great economy and we've got, amazing import and export, that everything's working for you. No. The reason why you have the ability to go to the shop and buy everything you want is because our Kodesh Baruch Hu makes it available to you. And similar to this, we find, Nimtza b'Parashat Ekev, says the pasuk like this. You should remember the journey that God Baruch Hu gave to you. That He took you there for 40 years. He fed you angels' bread for 40 years. And why are you commanded to remember this? Because our Kodesh Baruch Hu is bringing you to a good land. And you will eat and you will be full. And your heart will become haughty. And you will forget Hashem. And then you will say in your hearts, my strength gave me this ability. And when doing this mitzvah, you will then remember God who gave you this actual strength. And therefore, we leave our houses that are full of all this produce. Bezman asifa, at the time of collecting the food. And we sit in the sukkah to remember they did not have an inheritance of land in the midbar. Or not a house to sit in. And for this reason, that's why Kodesh Baruch Hu told us to sit in sukkah during the time when you collect the grains and from the vineyards, so that their hearts will not become haughty, because their hands are full of all the produce. They shouldn't say, that our hands created this this plenty. So we see from here, it's actually got to do with the time of year that they are collecting the produce, which sort of separates it from the whole concept of Ananei Kavod and the whole concept of Yetziat Mitzrayim. But it does answer for us why we learn that Chag Sukkot has several names. We learn in Pesach that Pesach is called Zman Cherutenu and Chag HaMatzot and so on and so forth. So
you could say
what?
You could say it sort of follows on from Yetziat Mitzrayim.
Why?
Because now that you're a free people, don't forget who took you out and who's giving you everything you have now.
Yeah, but he never mentioned that.
Well,
he's talking about even 600 years later when people are still harvesting, and it's going
yeah,
to Mitzrayim.
Yeah, as a free nation.
Yeah, but you could. It's again, he's not attaching it specifically that when you left Egypt, then you're going to become haughty. Yeah, we got out of there. No, because he's not talking about that. He's talking about when you worked and you're earning your own living and everything like that. Don't think that because of your capabilities that you got this. So I'm saying it's slightly it's answering why it's in Tishrei, but it's not leaning on the fact that it's dependent on Mitzrayim. But it answers why it's got a different name, because it's called Chag HaAsif. Sukkot's called Chag HaAsif. It's another name for Sukkot. So he's like latching onto that name of the Chag to explain why it's now. There is another Pirush that discusses. I think I'll just do a search on the find. 1 second. No, where is this gone? Okay, let's search. No, here we go. Okay, let's do this. Let's do this grow. I want to show you this grow, and you'll see why it's attached to what we're doing now. B'Shem HaGro, in the name of the Vilna Gaon, it's learned like this. Kashanase ha'egel, when they performed the avodah zara of the egel, histalku ha'ananim. The ananim vanished. V'lo chazru, and they didn't come back ad tetvav b'tishrei, until the 15th of Tishrei. B'ashlamat hanedava lamishkan, when completing the donations to building the Mishkan. So in the Sefer of Daf Haladaf, he says like this. Katav HaGra b'Shir HaShirim, the Gra writes in Shir HaShirim, B'ta'am sha'anu osim Chag HaSukkot zechel ananei kavod b'tetvav b'tishrei. Why we do Sukkot to remember the ananei kavod in Tishrei, v'lo b'Nisan and not in Nisan k'shiatzu miMitzrayim, when they left Egypt. So he says, Lefi k'she'asu b'nei Yisrael chet ha'egel, when b'nei Yisrael sinned with chet ha'egel, nistalku mehem ananei kavod, the ananei kavod left them. V'lo chazar mehem ad she'itchilu asat ha'mishkan, and never came back until they started the Mishkan. V'zeh haya b'tetvav b'tishrei. They started the Mishkan when they had the completion of the donations was on the 15th of Tishrei. Ki lemacharat Yom Kippurim, because the day after Yom Kippur, Yarad Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom min ha'ar. He came down from the mountain. V'hem, and Bnei Israel mevi'im elav, brought to him nedava, their donations, baboker. So on the 11th, he came down. Then for 2 days, baboker, they were bringing the donations. Shnei amim hari yud bet v'yud gimel tishrei. Okay, yud aleph, yud bet, yud gimel. Ubeyud dalet tishrei, and on the 14th of Tishrei, natlu kol chachmei lev mi Moshe et hazav. Then on the 14th, they took all the gold from Moshe in order to start working on it. Ubetetvav, and on the 15th, bo itchilu b'binyan hamishkan, they started building the tabernacle. Va'az chazru ananei kavod, and ananei kavod came back. That is according to the Gra, chronologically making this tying this all together. Says the Meshach Chochma on this note. כתב, דעל פי זה מבואר, למה בפרשת משפטים וכי תישא, this comes to explain to us why in the parshiot of Mishpatim and Kitise, נקרא חג הסוכות חג האסיף. Why חג הסוכות is called חג האסיף and it's not called חג הסוכות. ורק בפרשת אמור ופרשת פנחס ופרשת ראה נקרא חג הסוכות. And only later on, it's actually referred to as חג הסוכות. So in the first part, in Shemot and Vayikra, it's called Chag Asif, and in Bamidbar and Devarim, it's called Chag Sukkot. V'hu mishum, and this is because the Hach Ta'amad the Sukkot Zecher La'ananim, that the Sukkot is to remember the clouds of glory. Hitchil kanal rak achrei chet ha'egel v'hatchalat hakamat ha'mishkan, only started after they sinned in the egel and they established the Mishkan. ולכן רק מחומש ויקרא ואילך נקרא חג הסוכות, שאז היה הטעם הזה של הנקבות. Then the whole reason of Ananei Kavod came into question now. Beforehand, the whole reason was Chag Asif, because like we learned in the Rashbam, so that you shouldn't become haughty and soon as you say Kochi Ve'otzim Yadi, so we have Chag Asif in Tishrei. But now, after Chet HaEgel and the whole issue of Ananei Kavod, when they came back, then we have Chag Sukkot, and that only applies later on in Parshot Emor, Pinchas, and Re'eh. Okay?
Okay.
Lovely.
Very nice.
Okay. Right. Back to where we were beforehand. This is Rabbeinu Bachai. It's very interesting and it's quite long and arduous. So I'm just going to recap to you in the one sentence that I wrote over here to tell you what the Rabbeinu Bachai is saying. The Rabbeinu Bachai says, Betishrei nivra olam. The world was created in Tishrei. Okay, there's an argument in the Gemara if it was Tishrei or in Nisan. We hold the opinion, we rule in Halacha the opinion that was created in Tishrei. V'nivra ba'ot hei, and the world was created with the ot hei. Okay, v'asukkah, and the sukkah tzuratah k'tzurat hei, and the sukkah has two walls. The minimum sukkah has two walls like a hay, and another tiny little wall to make it kosher. So therefore, the tzura is like a hay, and the two come together. So therefore, we have Sukkot in Tishrei. That is the summation of the Rabbeinu Bachai. He wants to he elongates it by explaining that why the hay and not the yud, and the yud is for olam haba v'chole. And he explains that the hay has more gashmiut, and that's why it's olam hazeh, and the yud is more ruchani. It floats. It's a smaller letter, and therefore everything is spiritual in olam haba. He explains this with different sources, and that's the Rabbeinu Bachai. Okay. We're going to carry on to this Hilchot Shimoni. The Hilchot Shimoni says, since we finished our judgment of Yom Kippur, and we're worried about having a punishment of exile, we atone for this punishment ourselves by leaving the house and sitting in the sukkah. Now, I couldn't find the Hilchot Shimoni, but I do have the Sefer Hadar Zakenim from the Baalei Tosfot, who says exactly the same thing. And it is like this. Ba'agada, in the Agadata of it says, Amar Rabbi Eliezer, Lekach anachnu osim Sukkot achrei Yom Kippur. That's why we do Sukkot after Yom Kippur, which is completely different to all the other explanations. Lefi sheberosh Hashanah HaKadosh Baruch Hu yoshev v'dan kol ha'olam kulo, since HaKadosh Baruch Hu sits on Rosh Hashanah and he's judging the entire world. Ubi Yom Kippur chotem gzar dinam. And on Yom Kippur, he's going to decree their final din. V'shema Yisrael chayavim galut, and maybe we need to go into exile. Lekach golim bibatehem lesukkah. So we have to exile ourselves from the house to the sukkah. V'HaKadosh Baruch Hu maleh alehem ke'ilu galu leBavel. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu...
How this reconcile with Vayitach Sameach?
Oh, 1 second. 1 second. I have a maril for you, which is just over here. But you have slowly. Gilad, one at a time. Okay. This if we went all the way to Bavel. Now Bavel, Sham Yeshavnu, Bachinu, we're not in the house, we're in the sukkah. We're so, Chaval, we're sitting in the sukkah, it's uncomfortable, it's cold, and it's raining, and the sun's beating down. And we're not sitting on our beds and not on our sofas, and every time we want to eat something, you have to walk half a mile to the house and go down the stairs and back up again and then clean it. And it's a headache. So, as if we are putting upon ourselves this galut. Now, Gilad's got this brilliant question. It says, how does that work? So, just before we get to Gilad's brilliant question, I want to point out to you this one nekuda, which is very, very special here. We can bring upon ourselves self-affliction, and it will atone for us for what could be much worse. Now, we find this many, many times over. I've seen this many times in Chazal and Rabbanim who speak about this. That, as we know, in Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Kodesh Baruch Hu sets for us a certain amount of strain and pain and pressure that we have to go through in the following year. Now, it will definitely happen within the next year, because God will always make it exact. He will always put us through so much stress and pain and whatever it is that we need to, go through the next year. However, a person can be self-afflicting, and he can get this done easily, so to speak. A person can be self-afflicting by pushing himself to go to Shiur Torah. He can be self-afflicting by pushing himself to get to Minyanim on time. He can be self-afflicting by pushing himself to learn more. And this self-affliction will atone, or will, so to speak, take off the accounts of the affliction or the pain or pressure he has to go through in many, many other items. So it could save us a lot of hardships with our children, with our marriages, with our business, with our parnasa. A person could, chas v'shalom, things could, he could have a leak in his house, and he could have problems with his car, and he'd have to spend lots of money to go and fix these problems. Yet somebody can be self-afflicting and saying and push himself, getting earlier to shul on time, and he can push himself to make sure he gets to have the Shiur Torah, and that will be self-afflicting and take away from this account that we'd have to pay for from Rosh Hashanah. And this is we learn from this Hazar Zakenim with respect to the galut that we put upon ourselves. So now for Gilad's questions. This is a brilliant question. He says, Va'itach sameach, how can you go into the sukkah and make self-afflicting galus and we have to be ach sameach? So here's the answer. Darash Mahari Segal, the Mahari Segal makes an explanation. We make the Sukkot in Tishrei and not during the month of Nisan. Afagav dichtiv. Sorry, my kids are, playing around as kids do. Even though that it's written, even though technically it should be during the month of Nisan, you won't recognize the mitzvah if it's in Nisan. Because the one who sees this, Yoshev, that the guy sitting in sukkah, he's enjoying himself in the sukkah. Because in the month of Nisan, that he's going into the sukkah because he wants to be in the shade. Aval betishrei, but in the month of Tishrei, nichnasim yomot hakshamim is beginning of the winter months. V'kula nichnasim lebatahen, and everyone leaves the sukkah to go into the house. V'Yisrael hem kovim diratam b'sukkah. We set our apartment, so to speak. We set our lives in the sukkah. V'adai la'asot ratzon avim shebashamayim is definitely to do the ratzon avim b'shamayim. Al ken tziva mitzvat sukkah samuch le'yom kippurim. That's another reason why God commanded us to make the sukkah next to Yom Kippur. Shetarach liyot na v'nad mi beto. He has to leave and move from himself from the house. La sukkah, into the sukkah. V'domeh legalut. And this is similar to exile. Shu mechaper nami avonot. This also atones for his avonot. Mashal l'shnaim she'amdu bedin v'yotzim. This is a parable to two people who sat in judgment and they left and they finished their court case. The one who wins is really, really happy. The one who was beaten, he's very, very upset. He's very, very broken. And so too, this is how Bnei Israel and the Ummot of the world, the nations of the world, Amdu Ladin, we stood before God in judgment on Rosh Hashanah. We don't know who won. We're going to take it upon ourselves to make galut, but God is commanding us lismach b'mitzvat sukkah, to be enjoying the sukkah, to enjoy the mitzvah, to be happy. Sukkah v'lulav, in the sukkah and using the lulav leharot lekol shehem nitzchu. Even though we are taking ourselves into galut and we're, so to speak, our own averot, God is commanding us, I want you to be winners. You're going to go out as a winner. You're going to galut as the side of affliction. You know, it might be that you won and you might have to pay your court fees, but you won. You're in a sukkah and you are a winner. You have to be enjoying it. You have to be happy and you have to appreciate and enjoy the mitzvah. So special is this mitzvah that the Sfarim, they speak about this. You have to be happy the whole time. The Gra says, this is the hardest mitzvah. Okay, you have to be non-stop happy for 7 days straight. Okay, smile on your face. Everyone's going to see your teeth for 7 days. In your wake and your sleep, you can't shout at your wife or your kids. You can't be angry. You can't be upset that it's too cold or it's too early or it's too late or they're making too much noise or the food's burnt or the food's cold. You have to go into the house, get that. You need to be happy. 7. V'samachta b'chagecha v'hayita ach sameach. The only thing that you can do is be happy. Happy, 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 happy. Okay, so we're going to go into galut, into the sukkah, into these walls, and into this shade, and into this cold, but we're going to be happy about it because we are winners. Okay, Gilad?
Thank you. That's clear.
Okay. Okay, another answer by the Rabbi Yeshua ibn Shuib. It's probably the last one that we're going to see because I need to run off soon. Says Rabbi Yeshua like this, a sikum, so to speak, conclusion of what he's saying. Israel betzeta mitzrayim. When Bnei Israel left Egypt, hayut frudin b'matan Torah. They were preoccupied with Matan Torah. V'acharav, and after Matan Torah, bekefer Maseh Ha'egel, they had to atone for Maseh Ha'egel because they mucked up. V'rak b'yom tetvav b'tishrei, and only on the 15th of Tishrei, nitzpenu l'shev basukah. That's the only free time they had. Can you imagine this? For 6 months, they were just so preoccupied, like making things and mucking them up and then rebuilding them, that the first chance they had of sitting in a sukkah was only 6 months later in Sukkot. I just found this like a strange answer, but this is what he says, and he's an respected tshuva, so we have to appreciate what he's saying. We have to explain what the Rishonim are going to say, what they say about this topic. Why Kosh Baruch Hu told us to make the mitzvah of Sukkah on the 15th of Tishrei? If on the 15th of Nisan they were freed from slavery, whether according to the shita of Rabbi Akiva that they actually sat in a sukkah, ben lemanda amar anane kavod, or the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer that they had anane kavod. Lama yu betishrei? Why is this in Tishrei? Ki yoter ayu reuyin besivan betamuz ubeav shehen yemei hakait. It's much more understandable to sit in the sukkah during the month of Tammuz and Av and during the month of the summer months. So why are we remembering this whole thing in Tishrei? Now, my friend Meir Kosiol, he asked me the following question. He says that if they lost the Ananei Kavod during the summer and they only got it back at the beginning of the winter and they didn't even have Sukkot, then how did they survive in the heat of the desert the whole summer? The question is baffling, and I don't have an answer to this question. Okay, they left Mitzrayim, they got ready for Matan Torah, and they did Chet HaEgel, and they lost everything. They didn't have Ananei Kavod, and they weren't instructed yet to have Sukkot, because the instruction of Sukkot was only in Yudalid of Tishrei. So what did they do? In Tammuz, Av, and Elul, it was baking hot in the sun, in the desert. How did they survive? I don't have an answer for this. So if anyone comes up with an answer, please contact me and enlighten me, because it's very much bothering me. It's very, very bothering. I don't know how they survived. Okay, so says the Rav Yeshua ibn Shuib, he says like this. Ubezeh nuchal lomar. We can answer this. Ki bepesach sheyatz'u, when they left Mitzrayim in Pesach, in Nisan, ad Atzeret, until Shavuot, hayu asukin b'matan Torah u'b'taharatan. They were very much involved in purifying themselves and making themselves ready to accept the Torah. V'kara lahem mikrim, and they had different stories. Ma'amalek umemirivat halechem v'amayim, from the fighting of the war with Amalek, or the problems with not having lechem and water, and the whole argument and testing HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ula'acha Matan Torah, and after Matan Torah, asu ha'egel, then they created the golden calf. Vayu nezufim, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu was very angry with them. V'lo yardu ananei kavod, and they didn't have the ananei kavod anymore. Ad Yom Kippurim, until Yom Kippur shenitkaper avon ha'egel, when they had the atonement for the sin of the egel. Ulemacharato, and after they had the atonement of the egel on Yom Kippur, nitztavu ba'akamat HaMishkan, they were commanded with establishing the Mishkan. V'hayu trudin b'havat hanedava b'shnei ha'bekarim. You'll see the shitta is slightly different to the Gra, because he's saying they actually got the ananei kavod already by Yom Kippur. The Gra says they only got it by Sukkot, but he's saying they got it on Yom Kippur on Yud, and then they were instructed on Yud Aleph to bring the Nedava, and then for 2 mornings, Yud Bet and Yud Gimel, they were instructed, they brought in the Nedavot, okay, as it says in the Pasuk, Vehem eviu Nedava baboker, for 2 mornings, V'yom Yud Daled, and only on the 14th of Tishrei, they were commanded, Asu Sukkot, they built Sukkot. V'yom Tetvav, and on the 15th of the month, hitchilu leshev bahem, they started sitting on these Sukkot. So 10th they had Yom Kippur and they got the ananei kavod. On the 11th they were commanded to bring on the nedava. On the 12th and the 13th they brought the nedava. On the 14th they got the mitzvah to sit in the sukkah, and on the 15th they sat in the sukkah. V'kol elu ayamim, and for all these days, yesh bahen halel gamur. They say sat in the sukkah, and we say halel gamur for these 8 days. Ki korban chaluk v'haparim mitmatmin. The korban is the same each day, and the parim start at 12 and then go to 11 and then 10 and so on and so forth. Shehem shivim keneged shivim sarim, because these are 70 cows against the 70 nations, 70 angels of the nations. V'nahagu la'akif sefer Torah b'kol yom b'daled minim shebulav shiv'a yamim al shem shiv'a dvarim, and they circumference the Torah with the Shivat HaMinim, with Shiva Minim of the Lulav, so on and so forth. Lulav Gimel Hadasim Bet B'dei Aravot V'etrog Remez Liemot HaOlam, which is to connect the 7 days of the world, so to speak, 7 days of the week. Ulahekef Zain Shmitot Sha'olam Noeg Bahem, and according to the Shain Shmitot that we have 7 Shmitot and then we have Yovel. Ad Yom Shmini Chag Atzeret, until Shmini Chag Atzeret, which is going to be on Shabbat. She'en bo lulav uminav. There is no lulav and there is no hadasim and aravot and everything. Shehu menucha lechaye haolamim, because it's like a menucha, like in the next world. Because this world is 7 and the next world is 8. So Shmini Atzeret is like being part of the next world. Velachen nikra Atzeret, and therefore it's considered an Atzeret. So. Says the Rav Ibn Shuib that we were so preoccupied the whole time, and then finally we got the mitzvah of Sukkot. That's why it's in Tishrei. So I have one question, which is a personal question, which is baffling, and I don't have an answer to this either. And then I want you to tell you something about Shmini Atzeret, and then I'm going to run off. So my question is this: if they were instructed on the Yud Dalet Tishrei to build Sukkot, how on earth did they find enough wood on one day in the middle of the desert to build enough Sukkot for 6 million people? Is anyone baffled by my question? Yes, okay, fine. That's my question. Now, Sukkot Zion, or Ben Zion Mutzafi in his Sefer.
Maybe they had leftover from the Mishkan.
The Mishkan.
For 6 million people! One second, Mayor. The wood for the Mishkan, Yaakov Avinu planted that wood. He brought it down to Mitzrayim and it sat there for 210 years. Are you telling me he brought down enough wood for 6 million people to build Sukkot? Do me a favor.
Didn't he build Sukkot for the sheep first?
For his animals. How many animals did he have already?
Well, that was the preparation.
Rabbi Yaakov, do you know how many animals left Mitzrayim?
Quite a few.
Quite a few. I'm going to bring you an exact number. Are you ready for this? 60 animals, 60 donkeys carrying gold for each one human being between the age of 20 and 60 who was a male. Okay, 600,000 males times 60 animals. There were 54 million donkeys leaving Mitzrayim. Okay, if you want to make enough sukkot for 6 million people, you can forget about the sukkot for the animals. Forget about it, because there's not enough wood in all of Egypt for 54 million donkeys. Okay, so just a last note
Rabbi,
before I run off. Yes.
so sorry to disturb, but
Yeah.
I'm thinking, could it be maybe once they lost Anane Kavod, they built some sort of shelter like a sukkah?
With what?
So from what?
Yeah, from what? Because when they left Egypt with matzot and money, and jewels and diamonds and everything. Matzot and money. That's it. And okay, and they left with, like, you know, a few swords and a few arrows and shields. But that's it. They didn't leave with wood and lumber and you know, building material. God said, I'm going to look after you. You don't even need to pack a suitcase. They didn't even leave with clothes. Okay, they had dry cleaning from the Anane Kavod. So they didn't leave with lumber.
Yeah, I'm thinking like during the journey, maybe they kind of like accumulated stuff they picked up on the way.
Okay, where in the desert do you find wood?
All the chariots of the Egyptians.
But they were smashed up.
Yeah, swept to the shore with the gold.
Yeah, but they were smashed up. You can't build a house from smashed up wood. It's like sediments of, like, you know, what we make sibit. I don't know how you call it in English.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Plywood.
Exactly, plywood. Not even plywood. Pieces of plywood. There is a very, very fascinating. I hope I find it for you very quickly. Okay, says Rabbi Tzion Mitzafi about the whole issue of Simchat Torah and Shmini Atzeret, which is why it's such a holy day. Ma'ala nizgava yesh lanu am kadosh biyom Shmini Atzeret. We have a very, very special degree on Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah. You're very lucky you have it for 2 days. I only have it for 1 day. Va'amru beZohar HaKadosh. The Zohar HaKadosh writes like this: Ki yom zeh miyuchad l'Yisrael levadam. This day is very special for Bnei Israel, alone. Im Avinu Shebashamayim, with God in heaven. Uma sheishal v'yivakesh ha'adam mirobono shel olam. What a person will ask and request from HaKadosh Baruch Hu on this day, ya'aneh lo, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will answer him, ve'imale bakashoto, and he will fulfill his request. ולכן ראוי לשמור את כל השעות והרגעים, לשמוח בתורה ולהגות בה. You should be careful for every second to be learning Torah, or to be sameach with the Simchat Torah. He also says, he says like this: Ma'alot rabot amru rabotenu zichronam b'ravacha. Our rabbis taught us something very special about Simchat Torah. במי שמשתדל לשמוח ולרקוד בפני הספר תורה ביום זה. Someone who is very careful to dance and be happy with the Sefer Torah and Simchat Torah. שגורם שמחה גדולה בעולמות העליונים. He causes great simcha in the higher worlds. גם סגולות נפלאות נאמרו על שמחה זו. Many סגולות are written about this simcha. ומהן, and some of them are like this: שנמחלים לו כל עוונותיו. Somebody who is so happy and he dances and he joys with the Torah, that he wipes out his avonot. ומתקן את נשמתו מכל פגמיה. And he fixes his soul from any blemishes. Gam, now listen to this word, zoche, he merits, shiyu lo banim uvnei banim, children and grandchildren and so on and so forth. Gedolim baTorah, great giants in Torah. Ubiyir'ah tehorah, and in pure fear of heaven. Okay, so make sure you utilize your Shmini Atzeret to daven for what you need. Don't exaggerate. Only ask for God for what He can give you. Don't exaggerate. Only ask what He can give you. And you should be very, very happy, and you should be sameach and dance with your kochot in a respectful manner, and that this Kadosh Baruch Hu will merit for all of us to have a great new year and fulfill all of our requests, and will grant us children who will be great giants in Torah, in Yir'at Torah. Chag Sameach. I'm running off to Mincha. All the best.
Thank you.
בשמחה רבה רבה.
מועדים לשמחה.
חגים מוזמנים לששון. כל טוב. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Like Sameach.
Thank you.
חג שמח. חג שמח.